My name is Cassidy Farrell, and I was 33 years old the afternoon. My entire life rearranged itself in front of 160 people who had driven in from 4 different states to watch me get married. The venue was a private garden on the east side of Austin, the kind of place that costs more per hour than most people make in a week, with white peonies climbing wooden lattice, flagstone paths, and late afternoon Texas sun sitting low and gold over everything. The string quartet was playing something I had chosen 8 months earlier from a list of 17 options. And I remember thinking, standing just behind the entrance with my bouquet steady in both hands, that this was exactly what I had pictured. My father had his hand over mine, warm and certain, and he leaned close and asked quietly if I was ready. And I told him yes, and I meant it. Then the crowd shifted. Not loudly, just a ripple, the way people move when something has entered the room that doesn't belong there. A woman walked through the side gate in jeans and a fitted top, unbothered, unhurried, like she had every right to be exactly where she was. I didn't need anyone to tell me who she was. Serena Pruitt. The woman Marcus had dated for 5 years before me. The woman, he said, was completely behind him. The woman whose name had come up exactly once in 4 years and been dismissed before I could finish my sentence. Marcus was standing at the altar. And then he wasn't. He was moving. Not slowly. Not hesitantly. Not the way someone moves when they're surprised. He ran. He crossed the entire garden in seconds. Past the altar. Past the chairs. Past every single person who had shown up that day because they believed in what we were building together. And he pulled Serena Pruitt into a hug that told me everything I needed to know before a single word was spoken. Not the kind of hug you give someone you used to know. Not polite. Not brief. Not the hug of a man who is startled to see someone from his past. His arms wrapped around her and held on, and her face pressed into his shoulder like she had done it 1,000 times and expected to do it 1,000 more. I stood behind the entrance and watched it, and felt something inside my chest go completely, unnervingly quiet. My mother made a sound somewhere behind me. A glass was set down too fast on one of the cocktail tables. The string quartet stopped mid-phrase. Not all at once. Just instrument by instrument. Like each player was reading the room a half-second after the one beside them. When Marcus and Serena finally stepped back from each other, she reached up and held his face in both hands, speaking quickly. Words I couldn't hear. And he nodded. And then he smiled. Not confused. Not overwhelmed. Not the expression of a man caught off guard by something he didn't expect. He smiled the way people smile when something they've been carrying finally gets set down. That was the moment I understood. Not suspected. Not feared. Understood. Because I had seen Marcus surprised before. And surprised doesn't look like that. Surprise doesn't hold on. Surprise doesn't smile from somewhere deep behind the eyes like a door just opened that had been locked for a long time. She had not shown up unannounced. He had known she was coming. He had let her walk through that gate knowing I was 40 feet away in a wedding dress, and he had run to her anyway. The thing about being shown the truth that clearly is that you can't unknow it. You can't soften it into a misunderstanding or reshape it into something that hurts less. I looked down at the bouquet in my hands, at the dress I had spent 4 months finding, at the life I had been constructing detail by careful detail. And I saw it the way you see something only after the light hits it at exactly the right angle. Not a future. A structure built on a foundation someone else had already cracked. I handed my bouquet to Jenna without a word, and she took it without asking why. Because my sister has always been able to read a room faster than anyone I know, and what she was reading right now was written plainly across every inch of that garden. I walked toward the ceremony space the same way I had planned to walk down that aisle. Steadily, without rushing, without looking at Marcus or Serena or any of the 160 faces turning toward me, trying to figure out what kind of announcement this was going to be. The officiant saw me coming and stepped aside, which was the smartest thing anyone did that afternoon. The microphone was still live. I know because I could hear the feedback hum when I reached for it. That faint electric presence that means every word is going somewhere. I kept my voice even and said, "Hey everyone. Quick change of plans." A few nervous laughs scattered through the crowd. The kind people produce when they're hoping what comes next is something they can laugh along with. "There isn't going to be a wedding today." The silence that followed was total and immediate, the kind that has actual weight to it. Someone's phone hit the flagstone, and the crack of it carried all the way to the back row. I let it land, then kept going. "The reception is fully paid for. So please eat, drink, enjoy yourselves. Consider it an early Sunday party." From across the garden, Marcus called out, "What are you doing?" And his voice had that particular pitch of someone who is panicking but trying to sound reasonable. And I turned and looked at him standing there beside Serena and said clearly enough for the microphone to catch it, "What you should have done 6 months ago." I handed the mic back to the officiant, turned to Jenna, and said, "We need to go." She already had her keys in her hand. Behind me, I could hear Marcus calling my name, and Brenda Dillon's voice cutting over his, sharp and carrying, and the low roar of 160 people trying to process what they had just witnessed. But by the time any of it registered as sound, I was already moving through the side gate, and none of it had anywhere to land on me. Jenna had the car running before I reached the passenger door. I got in, pulled the door shut, and the garden noise dropped to almost nothing. The way sound does when a seal closes around you and the outside world becomes something you're watching through glass rather than standing inside of. My bouquet was still in Jenna's back seat. I noticed it sitting there and felt nothing in particular about it, which told me something I hadn't had words for yet. Jenna didn't ask me anything. She just drove, and I sat with both hands loose in my lap and looked at the dress spreading out around me in the seat and understood, with a clarity that felt almost impersonal, that the worst of it was already over. Not the grief, not the untangling, not the logistics of a life that needed to be separated and repacked, but the not knowing. That part was finished. When Jenna finally pulled onto the highway heading north, I felt something shift in my chest. Not dramatically, just a quiet, almost cellular loosening. The sensation of a weight I had apparently been carrying so long, I had stopped registering it as weight at all. Not heartbreak, not anger. Something closer to air coming back into a room. 3 hours after the wedding that never happened. I was pulling a suitcase out of the closet we had shared for 2 years, and making decisions about what was mine with a speed and certainty that surprised even me. By the next morning, I was at Austin Bergstrom with a carry-on and a checked bag and a boarding pass to Nashville, because the honeymoon hotel was booked. The rate was non-refundable, and there was no version of that week I was willing to simply forfeit. I turned my phone notifications off somewhere over Arkansas and didn't turn them back on until we landed. The front desk clerk at the hotel pulled up the reservation, glanced at the name, glanced at me, and with a professionalism I genuinely respected, said only, "We'll take care of you." And she meant it. The room was exactly what Marcus and I had chosen together, and for about 30 seconds that stung in a specific, physical way, and then it didn't, because the room was also quiet, and the quiet was entirely mine. 6 days. Morning coffee on the balcony, watching Lower Broadway come alive below me. Long dinners at the bar where nobody knew my name or my story. Afternoons, walking through neighborhoods with no particular destination and no one to check in with. By day 3, eating alone had stopped feeling like something I was enduring and started feeling like something I had chosen. By day 5, I understood the difference between being left and being freed. And that difference was not small. The messages kept stacking up on my phone. Marcus first. Then Brenda. Then Tyler. Then people from the guest list I hadn't spoken to in years, suddenly finding reasons to reach out. I checked them once a day. In the evenings. The way you check the weather in a city you're no longer traveling to. Noted. Irrelevant. Each time I closed the app, The 6 days in Nashville mattered more, and the noise from Austin mattered less. I texted Marcus from the airport before my flight landed. Coming for my things. Be there or don't. I'm clearing out what's mine. He responded in under 30 seconds, which told me he had been holding his phone waiting. And what he wrote was, "Please don't do this like this. We need to talk first." Which I didn't answer because every version of "we need to talk" means the same thing. He wanted a chance to rearrange the facts until they were easier for him to live with. When I pulled into the parking lot of the apartment we had shared, Brenda Dillon's car was already there, which I had half expected, because Brenda treated every crisis in her son's life like a production she needed to direct personally. Tyler's car was there too, and parked 2 spaces over was a rental I didn't recognize until I walked through the door and found Serena Pruitt sitting on the couch in my living room like she had somehow mistaken this for her business. I looked at Marcus and said, "You brought her here?" And he said it wasn't what it looked like. And I laughed. Not bitterly. Just with the specific weariness of someone receiving confirmation they had already stopped needing. I went straight to the bedroom and started packing. Brenda positioned herself in the doorway with her arms folded and her voice at full volume. "You made a scene in front of our entire family." I kept moving through the closet as I answered her. "Your son ran to another woman while I was supposed to be walking toward him." "That's the scene." "Brenda." She started to say something about how Marcus had been shocked, and I corrected her without looking up. He was joyful. "Shocked doesn't hold on like that." That landed. I could tell because she stopped talking for almost 10 full seconds, which for Brenda Dillon was essentially silence. 3 trips. Clothes. Laptop. Books. The watch my father gave me. The skincare I had paid for that Marcus used to joke about. And the 6 5-inch television I had bought and had the receipt for. Marcus watched me disconnect it from the wall and carry it toward the door and said, "Seriously, you're taking that too?" And I balanced it against my hip and told him evenly, "Did you think public betrayal came with a complimentary electronics package?" Tyler turned toward the window to hide whatever was happening on his face. I did my 3 trips methodically. And by the time I was loading the last box, the apartment already felt like somewhere I used to live inside my head long before I left it physically. Marcus followed me out to the parking lot on the final trip, the way I knew he would. Because he always needed the last word in an empty room with no witnesses. "I choose you now," he said, and his voice cracked on the last word in a way that 6 days ago would have reached something in me. I looked at him for a moment, at the man I had spent 4 years building a life beside, and I told him the truth without raising my voice. Too late is its own answer. "Marcus." I got in the car. I didn't look in the rearview mirror when I pulled out. Not because it didn't hurt, but because the hurt was already behind me, right where it belonged. Before I reached my car with the last box, Brenda had found her footing again, and she came out onto the sidewalk with the specific energy of someone who had located what she believed was leverage. "We can sue you for your half of the wedding costs," she said. "We spent over $42,000 and you walked away from all of it." I set the box down on the trunk of my car, unlocked my phone, and opened the email folder I had been maintaining for 8 months without entirely knowing why. The kind of quiet instinct that protects you before you understand what you're being protected from. Venue contract. Catering agreement. Floral deposit confirmation. Lighting package. Every major obligation from that wedding had Brenda's signature on it. Or Marcus's. Or both. Not mine. I had contributed $3,500 directly to the bar package, transferred from my personal account, and I had the bank record to prove it. I turned the screen toward her and said, "Find my name." She looked. Her expression shifted in a way she couldn't control, and Marcus looked at the ground, which told me everything, because that wasn't surprise on his face. He had known. Maybe not consciously, maybe not in a way he had examined clearly, but on some level he had known I wasn't on those contracts. and he had never said a word about it. Brenda said that was impossible, and I told her it was accurate. And the difference between those two words is the difference between what she wanted to be true and what a Texas court would actually see. I picked up my box. She didn't follow me to the car after that. I drove away with $3,500 in documented exposure and zero legal obligation for the rest. And whatever Brenda planned to do with her invoices was entirely between her son, and the vendors who had signed agreements with them. 3 weeks after the wedding that never happened, the consequences started arriving for Marcus in the quiet, compounding way that consequences do when there is no one left to absorb them on someone else's behalf. The landlord called me first, which I had not expected. Marcus had missed the rent deadline on the apartment, and somewhere in the original lease paperwork, my name had been listed as an emergency contact and income reference, which apparently he had interpreted as a buffer he could lean on. The landlord was apologetic and careful, and I told him clearly and without anger that I was no longer responsible for anything connected to that unit, that Marcus would need to handle it on his own, and that I wished him luck with the process. The eviction notice came 10 days after that, but the part that stopped me, the part I had to sit with for a while before I could say anything about it out loud, was what I learned about Serena Pruitt. She had left Austin 2 days after the wedding, not to reconcile with Marcus, not to build anything with him, not even to have a conversation that lasted longer than the one she'd already had in that garden. She left because she had gotten what she came for. Serena had been engaged for 6 months to someone in Denver, and she had shown up to our wedding, coordinated in advance with Marcus, because she needed to confirm he still had feelings for her before she walked down her own aisle. She needed that nod. She needed that smile. And Marcus had given it to her in front of every person who had ever believed in us, without hesitation, without apparent awareness of what it would cost. She got married 3 weeks later. The photos circulated through our shared social circles the way things do now, quietly and everywhere at once. And Marcus saw them. According to people who were still close enough to him to notice, that was the moment something in him finally gave way completely. Not loudly, not publicly, but in the specific way that happens when you realize the thing you burned everything down for was never going to be yours, and everything you left behind is already gone. That same week, my manager called me into his office on a Thursday morning and closed the door, which is never how a routine check-in starts. He told me an anonymous complaint had been filed, claiming I had been using company resources for personal matters during work hours, specifically wedding planning, and that I had been aggressive toward colleagues in the weeks leading up to my leave. He was measured about it, careful, and I could tell from the way he was watching me that he had already done some digging before this conversation. He said he had reviewed my system logs and spoken to 3 people on my team and found nothing that supported either claim. And then he leaned back and told me plainly that someone was trying to cause problems for me, and that given my recent situation, he had his suspicions about where it originated. I thanked him, kept my voice even, and walked back to my desk with a very clear understanding of how far outside that garden the damage had been intended to reach. 2 days later, I came out of my building on a Saturday morning and found a long, deliberate scratch keyed down the entire driver's side door of my car, deep enough to cut through the paint to the metal. I stood there for a moment in the parking lot with my coffee going cold in my hand. Not shocked, just tired in the specific way. You get tired when someone mistakes pettiness for power. I filed a police report, contacted my insurance, paid the $500 deductible, and then I called an attorney. The cease and desist letter was drafted within 24 hours, sent certified mail, return receipt required. Marcus had to sign for it personally. After that, the noise stopped. 2 months after the wedding, a message came in from a number I didn't recognize, which I almost deleted before the preview stopped me. It was Marcus. His therapist, he wrote, had told him he needed to take accountability. So here it was. He hadn't been over Serena. He hadn't handled it honestly. He had hurt me, and I had deserved better. He said he wasn't expecting forgiveness and wasn't asking for it. He just needed me to know that he understood now. I read it 3 times, not because I was reconsidering anything, but because there was something I needed to confirm for myself, which was that I had not imagined any of it, had not overreacted, had not misread a situation that was always exactly as clear as it looked from where I was standing in that garden in my wedding dress. His message confirmed all of that without meaning to. I wrote back once, "I appreciate you saying that, but we're done. And that's not going to change. I hope therapy helps you. Please don't contact me again." Then I blocked the number. Not out of anger, because the anger had been gone for weeks by then, but because closure is not a conversation you keep reopening to make sure it still holds. Tyler messaged a few days after that. Something about how Marcus was barely holding it together and I could help if I wanted to. And I typed back, "That's the consequence of his choices. Not my responsibility." And blocked him too. Brenda had gone quiet after the certified letter. Derek Foss, the friend who had known about Serena for 3 months before the wedding and had said nothing to me, lost 2 subcontracting referrals when the full story spread through the Austin construction network. I had not done anything to cause that. I did not need to. I signed the lease on a 1-bedroom apartment in East Austin on a Tuesday morning. And by that afternoon, I was standing in the middle of an empty living room with good light coming through the south-facing windows and not a single memory embedded in any of the walls, which felt less like a fresh start and more like returning to a version of myself that had been waiting patiently for me to come back. I painted the bedroom a soft sage green that Marcus would have vetoed without much thought. I bought a couch I chose entirely alone in 20 minutes, and filled the shelves with books organized in the order I actually wanted rather than the order that looked better to someone else. I adopted a dog from Austin Pets Alive, a 2-year-old mutt named Remy with too much energy and a habit of following me from room to room like he had taken the job of keeping me company seriously and intended to do it well. Best decision I made in the entire year. Work steadied itself after the false complaint was formally marked as malicious in my HR file. And a few weeks later, I received a small raise that landed in my account, the same week Marcus's eviction became final, which I noted without celebration and moved on from immediately. Slowly, without engineering it, I started seeing someone new. A person who did not carry unresolved history into every room he entered, who asked questions and waited for the actual answers, who made everything feel uncomplicated in a way I had forgotten was possible. The first time I told him the full story, he was quiet for a moment and then said simply, "Sounds like the universe made a call for you." I thought about that for a second and then thought, maybe. Or maybe I made it myself, standing in front of a live microphone in the most expensive dress I had ever worn, with steady hands and nothing left to lose. If you stayed with this story all the way to the end, it means something in it reached you. And I want you to know that this one carries a piece of my real life inside it. I hope it leaves you feeling a little lighter, a little clearer, and reminded that choosing yourself is never the wrong call.